Well, it's finally over. This first season of Percy Jackson and the Olympians has come to an end. And I have to say, what a thrill. I mean, this was to finally see a mostly accurate adaptation of one of my favorite childhood come to the big screen. Wow. I do say mostly as there were some changes made from the source material that I didn't really care for, but we will get to those soon enough. I don't want to keep you guys waiting too long, so I'm going to give you a brief rundown of how this video is going to go. First, I'm going to be doing a recap of the story, pointing out some Easter eggs along the way that I found really cool. Second, I will be ranking each episode on a scale of 1 to 10, and remember, these are just my personal opinions. Obviously, you might have something different, you might have the same rankings, but if you do have different rankings, I just ask that you be polite in the comments when expressing these views. Next up, we're going to be going throughout the series, and I will give you my top 10 moments/lines from the show that I just absolutely loved. Fourth will be my thoughts on some of the bigger names in the cast and how I felt that they did in this first season. Finally, I will be expressing my personal thoughts, critiques, and hopes for any potential seasons that we might get. As of this recording, we do not yet have any confirmation from Disney that season 2 will be coming or any future seasons, as Percy Jackson and the Olympians is originally a 5-book series. So without further ado, here is the season 1 recap of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So this first season of Percy Jackson and the Olympians is based off of The Lightning Thief, which is the first book in the original 5-book series that came out in 2005. We opened the series to honestly a really solid start, with Percy giving a brief monologue about how dangerous it is to be a half-blood, which is the term given to children of the Olympian gods. And I couldn't be happier with the opening of this scene, as it is word for word straight from the book.
Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you think you might be one of us, my advice is turn away while you still can, because once you know what you are, they'll sense it too, and they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you.
A short montage of Percy as a young boy at school, seeing glimpses of the mythological world that he belongs to, is shown before being brought to present-day New York City at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where we're introduced to Grover Underwood, Percy's best friend, along with their algebra teacher, Mrs. Dodds. After an incident involving a water fountain, Mrs. Dodds reveals herself to be one of the 3 Furies and attacks Percy, but fortunately, due to having received a special gift from his Latin teacher, Mr. Brunner, Mrs. Dodds is swiftly defeated. After being expelled for pushing Nancy into the fountain, Percy comes back home to find his stepfather, Gabe Ugliano, who he's nicknamed Smelly Gabe, gambling and watching ESPN, which again is something that is straight from the books and a detail that I love they included. They have a brief conversation about Percy's grades before we're finally introduced to Sally Jackson, who is Percy's mom, sitting out in the rain, clearly in thought about something, but I'll get back to that later on in this video. A short discussion about Percy getting kicked out of school follows, and they depart to a cabin out on Long Island Sound that they've been visiting for years. During the car ride, Percy has a dream on the beach where he sees a strange figure out in the distance who warns him to run away before he gets hurt. And again, this is something I will come back to later on. After getting settled in, Percy confides in his mom that he's been feeling a little insecure about some of his disabilities, i.e. his ADHD, his dyslexia, and just his general lack of not really fitting into the world. After this, Sally finally tells Percy the truth, that he is a half-blood, meaning he is the son of a god.
A long time ago, I met a man here on the beach, and then I realized he was unlike any man I had ever met before, because he wasn't a man at all. He was a god. In those stories, I have told you about how gods and mortals would sometimes have
Mom,
children
please
together,
stop.
children called
Mom.
demigods, and sometimes they are known as half-bloods. You are a half-blood. And half-bloods are not safe in the world.
Percy, of course, is in denial, as any sane person would be, But before he can really express how he feels about this whole thing, they're interrupted by Grover, arriving at the cabin, who reveals himself to be a satyr, which in Greek mythology was a half man and half goat. During the following car ride, Grover explains that the place they're traveling to is Camp Half-Blood, which is the only place safe on Earth for demigods. Before they arrive, however, they're attacked by the Minotaur, who's a monster that is half man and half bull. In the ensuing encounter, the Minotaur seemingly crushes Sally into golden dust, which understandably makes Percy very upset. He manages to defeat the monster by using one of its own horns that he breaks off before passing out on the ground. Waking up in the big house at Camp Half-Blood, Percy's introduced to the camp director, the god of wine Dionysus, but here he only goes by Mr. D, along with Chiron, who actually was Mr. Brunner, making a home in Cabin 11, which is the home of the children of the god of messengers and travelers, Hermes, along with unclaimed demigod children. We're introduced to Luke Castellan, who is a son of Hermes, where we get a montage of him coaching Percy to find out who his godly parent is, during which he tells Percy the story of Thalia, who was the forbidden child daughter of Zeus, one of the big three, referring to the three eldest gods, being Zeus, god of the skies and king of the gods, Poseidon, god of the seas, and Hades, god of the dead and the underworld. You see, the children of these three gods are exceptionally powerful, far more powerful than your average demigod, and they tend to cause some issues in the real world, i.e. World War II. After the war had ended, the three brothers decided to swear a solemn vow on the river Styx, which is one of the most sacred vows you could ever make. This vow entailed that the three would never have any more demigod children, as they were far too powerful and caused issues. However, clearly Zeus broke that promise and sired Thalia, who was a demigod that arrived at Camp Half-Blood along with Luke and another character that we will meet shortly enough. This group of heroes that arrived at camp were attacked by countless monsters, the absolute worst of the worst. Thalia stood in defense and told her friends to get to safety while she held them off to buy them some time. Unfortunately, however, Thalia was severely injured, and as she lay there, dying, her father Zeus took pity on her and turned her into a pine tree. Such was the power of this sacrifice that it created a magical barrier around all of camp that would not allow any monsters to come inside the perimeter. After an incident in the bathroom with the god of war Ares' daughter, Clarisse LaRue, we meet Annabeth Chase, daughter of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, where she tells Percy that she wants him on her team for Capture the Flag, during which Clarisse attacks Percy as revenge for the bathroom. And in this encounter, Percy manages to break Clarisse's electric spear, which was a gift from her father. Just after the victory of the blue team, Percy confronts Annabeth for using him as bait in order to win the game. She then pushes him into the water, and his injuries that he sustained from Clarisse heal before it's revealed that he has been claimed by Poseidon, and therefore a forbidden child.
You have been claimed by Poseidon, Earthshaker, Stormbringer, Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon.
Percy is then briefed at the big house by Chiron and Mr. D on the current state of affairs on Olympus. Zeus's master bolt has been stolen, and the Lord of the Skies has accused Percy of being the lightning thief. Now being charged with a quest to find and return the master bolt by the summer solstice on June 21st, Percy heads up to the attic to visit the Oracle, a mysterious mummy that issues prophecies to heroes before they set off on their journeys. Percy is giving the following prophecy.
You shall go west and face the god who has turned, and you shall find what was stolen and see it safely returned. You shall be betrayed by the one who calls you friend and fail to save what matters most in the end.
After which, he chooses Annabeth and Grover to be his companions, as every quest, the main hero is allowed to have two companions. As he's packing to leave, he's visited by Luke, who gives him a gift of magical flying shoes that he stole from his father Hermes.
Maya. A gift from my dad, Maya.
and the trio set off into the mortal world. But they don't make it very far. Heck, they barely get out of New Jersey before they're attacked by Electo, aka Mrs. Dodds, where she offers Annabeth to turn in Percy so that the other two can continue the quest. They are saved by Medusa, who offers them food and shelter.
Electo, will you be joining us?
No, well, I wouldn't think you would.
We all choose who we make our monsters, but right now, that one wants to tear you limb from limb, and I'm offering you lunch. The choice is yours.
While eating lunch, Medusa tells them the story of how she came to be.
Do you know the story of how I came to be this way?
I do.
Do you?
Do I?
Athena was everything to me. I worshipped her. I prayed to her. I made offerings. She never answered. Not even an omen to suggest she appreciated my love. I would have worshipped her that way for a lifetime, in silence. But then one day, another god came and he broke that silence. Your father. The sea god told me that he loved me. I felt as though he saw me in a way I had never felt seen before. But then Athena declared that I had embarrassed her and I needed to be punished.
She then offers to turn Annabeth and Grover to stone, so Percy can continue his quest unencumbered. After defeating Medusa using a combination of the flying shoes that Percy gave to Grover to wear and Annabeth's smart thinking, the trio's friendship and trust in each other is strengthened, and Percy sends Medusa's head to Olympus. Kind of bold of him. One might even say pertinent of him to do so. The trio then board a train that has a stop in St. Louis, Missouri, but before they arrive, they are confronted by Echidna, the mother of all monsters, who informs them that one of her children will be hunting them down as practice. They escape to the Gateway Arch, which is downtown, but are cornered by Echidna and her child, the Chimera. Percy manages to get his friends away to safety, but is attacked and left dangling from the arch. He then falls, and it appears as though he's going to become a Percy pancake, but he is saved by his father, who uses a giant spout of water to grab Percy mid-fall and pull him into the Mississippi River, where he meets a Nereid, a water spirit, who tells Percy to go to Santa Monica in California to receive help from his father. Emerging from the Mississippi, Percy relays his father's message to his friends, and they begin the long journey once more, but are met along the way by Ares himself. After promising to give them supplies and transportation to Las Vegas, Nevada, he tasks Percy and Annabeth in retrieving a shield that he left behind at a water park, which is built by Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths and fire. While Percy and Annabeth go after the shield, however, Grover talks to Ares and manages to get some information out of him. Just a really small piece of information, which just so happens to be what he thinks is the identity of the lightning thief. After escaping a trap and an encounter with Hephaestus himself, Percy and Annabeth return, upon which Ares holds up his end of the bargain and gives them a ride along with a backpack of supplies, while also telling the trio that they are most likely going to fail, and Percy responds with,
We're not gonna fail. And I'm getting pretty tired of you saying it. You think you know who I am, but you don't. And if you aren't careful, you're gonna find out.
On the way to Las Vegas, the trio send an Iris message to Luke back at camp, where he informs the heroes that things at camp are rather tense, and it seems as though everyone is gearing up for war, as the cabins are now choosing sides between backing up Zeus and backing up Poseidon. They then tell Luke that they believe Clarice herself is the lightning thief. Just as Percy is about to mention that they're on their way to go see Luke's father Hermes, Annabeth cuts the connection short, explaining that Luke and his father don't really have a good relationship. Upon arriving to the Lotus Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, the trio decide to split up to search for Hermes. Grover runs into a fellow satyr who is also on the search for the god of the wild, Pan, but has lost his way as he's been trapped in the casino for quite some time. Percy and Annabeth find Hermes, who is played by Lin-Manuel Miranda, aka Hamilton.
My name is Alexander Hamilton.
And he tells them that being a parent, especially a godly parent, is rather difficult. After Hermes lets slip that time is running out on their quest, Percy puts two and two together and realizes that even though it's only felt like an hour, they've been at the casino for days. After Annabeth hijacks Hermes' car and gives the keys to Percy, the trio arrive at Santa Monica, where Percy walks into the ocean, meeting the Nereid once more, who profusely apologizes for the absence of Poseidon, as it is revealed that the solstice has passed earlier that evening and war will be breaking out. To which Percy says that far too important that they get this bolt and return it to Zeus. The Nereid then gives Percy 4 pearls to escape from the underworld. Arriving at Krusty's waterbed emporium, our trio trap Krusty with his own waterbed before entering the underworld, where they're confronted by Charon, the ferryman of the dead, into the underworld, and Cerberus, the monster's 3-headed dog who guards the gate. During which, Grover is temporarily eaten by the dog and accidentally loses his pearl. Afterward, the trio begin making their way to Hades' palace, but unfortunately, Annabeth gets trapped by some roots and has to use her pearl to return to the mortal world without the other two. Continuing across sandy fields in the underworld, Grover's flying shoes suddenly act up and start carrying him towards this massive pit. But thank the gods, Percy's able to save Grover, during which it's revealed that the Master Bolt itself is in the backpack that was given to Percy by Ares, where they realize that Ares is in cahoots with whoever stole the lightning bolt. The pair arrive at Hades' palace, where a brief discussion ensues, where it is revealed that not only does Hades not really care about the squabble of his brothers, but that his Helm of Darkness was stolen as well. Percy puts the pieces together and figures out who really is behind all of this. Who stands to gain the most from this quarrel?
Super unhealthy. Someone stole Zeus's bolt. It wasn't me. It must have been somebody who was...
Kronos.
Excuse me?
He's got the longest grudge of them all. Zeus took Kronos' throne. Who else is a bigger reason to weaken Zeus and take his throne back?
Kronos is in a million pieces at the bottom of Tartarus.
Where something just tried to pull us into it the moment the bolt appeared in our bag.
The pair of friends then escape to the mortal world, and upon arriving, we hear the monologue of Poseidon talking about the day he will finally meet his son, while Percy faces off against Ares, who has come to cut any loose ends to the overall plan.
One day when he's ready, when he knows who he is and where he belongs, and fate has revealed to him his true path, on that day, I'll be right by his side.
He calls the god of war out for being manipulated by Kronos, being influenced during his dreams. Ares responds, stating,
"Gods don't dream, little man, and no one tells the god of war how to start a fight."
After using his oceanic powers to defeat Ares in single combat, Percy has the Helm of Darkness returned to Hades via Alecto, who has come to collect the item. After a short discussion about returning the bolt to Zeus with his friends, Percy makes the journey to the Empire State Building in New York City, there in which he takes the elevator up to the 600th floor, which is where Mount Olympus rests. Finally meeting the King of the Gods and his uncle, Percy returns what was stolen, while also informing him of the increasing strength of Kronos. Zeus informs his forbidden nephew that this news is the only reason he will let Percy leave alive, but that the war with Poseidon will proceed as planned. Percy openly objects to this and tells Zeus that the Olympians are an absolute mess. Percy then tells Zeus that the other gods don't respect Zeus out of love, they do it out of fear. He then asks how the rest of the family will react when Kronos finally arrives to, quote, put you back in your place, which greatly pisses off the Lord of the Skies, so much so that he is willing to strike down his own nephew. However,
I surrender. What? I surrender.
after surrendering the war to his younger brother, Poseidon has a conversation with Zeus in ancient Greek, asking him, After Zeus leaves, Poseidon turns to see his son for the very first time, stating that
obedience doesn't come naturally to you, does it?
Which is a line straight from the book. Percy asks his father,
Do you dream?
As Ares had earlier stated that gods don't, to which Poseidon says,
Ares is a moron, a Perhaps you noticed. Of course we dream. Why do you ask?
Then Percy asks,
Do you ever dream about Mom?
Poseidon then reveals another pearl and uses it to send Percy back to camp, where Annabeth and Luke inform Percy that they have a plan to speak to Chiron about Clarice being the lightning thief, away from the others, as to not draw attention to her. Out in the woods, Percy and Luke talk about the prophecy that Percy received, and how each line has come true, except for one, where Percy finally realizes that Luke was the lightning thief. He stole not only Zeus's master bolt, but Hades' helm of darkness. Luke explains that Percy is not his enemy, and that he doesn't want to fight him. He actually wants Percy to join him. During the ensuing fight, Luke escapes from camp, and the next day, Percy prepares to head back to the mortal world, but first stops by the Montauk cabin to see if Hades has returned Sally. The mother and son finally reunite, but we are once again interrupted by Kronos, as this entire scene was actually just a dream that Percy was having. Percy tells Kronos to leave, as he completed his mission to return the bolt to Zeus and prevent the war. Kronos responds by saying,
Oh, soon enough we'll meet in your world. If you can survive, what's next?
before Percy finally wakes up for his first day of 7th grade. His mother asks what he was having a nightmare about, and Percy responds with one of the funniest lines in the show.
Grandpa.
Don't call him that.
We wrap the season off with Percy giving a short speech similar to the one we heard at the beginning of the season.
The stories you heard about Greek gods, heroes, and monsters, I'm here to tell you they're real. If you ever feel like you don't fit, like the world doesn't make sense, then you might be a part of our world. So don't give up, because we might need you for the fight ahead.
So there you go, a recap of Season 1. I know I left out some rather important details. I did my best to shorten this for you guys, but I really want to get into this next segment. In this segment, I will be ranking all 8 episodes of Season 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. And please remember that these are just my opinions. So just because I think that some episodes are in the bottom half or at the bottom itself, that doesn't mean that I hate them. So let's kick off with 8th place. Is episode 4, I Plunge to My Death. Now, while this clearly wasn't my favorite episode, there were some things that I actually really liked about this episode, such as Echidna's talk with the trio, specifically this line here.
This isn't your fault, but sadly, you're going to have to bear the burden of your parents' mistakes today.
Along with finally having an actual logical explanation as to how Percy managed to survive from the Arch. As in the book, he simply jumps, and if you've ever seen a picture of the Gateway Arch in proximity to the Mississippi River, there is no way anyone, even with legs made of hydraulic springs, is making this jump. Now again, while I don't hate this episode, it is unfortunately at the very bottom, with an overall score of 6 out of 10. Next on the list is episode 5, A God Buys Us Cheeseburgers. Now, I know for some people this episode might be a little bit higher, potentially near the top, but again, it just wasn't hitting home for me. Of course, I absolutely love Adam Koplik as Ares. I don't think there is a more perfect cast for this choice of character. But aside from this and the scene where What Is Love is playing in the background, there isn't a whole lot of this episode that I really cared for. However, I did really enjoy the moment between Annabeth and Percy. So in 7th place with a score of 6.5 out of 10 is episode 5. In 6th place, we have the season finale, The Prophecy Comes True. Nah, I'm kidding. There's no way I'm putting this episode that low. In reality though, it's gonna be episode 6. We Take a Zebra to Vegas. This was a decent episode in my eyes, but personally, I felt it was a little too short. I did very much enjoy Lin-Manuel Miranda as Hermes. Honestly, I think it's great. And I really love his talk with Percy and Annabeth about the relationship of gods and their children, along with a very cool Easter egg for potential future seasons. There's a very cool Easter egg in this episode that I just absolutely loved, and I didn't even notice it the first time. I had to rewatch this episode and listen very carefully. Now, if you have not read the original 5 books, this is your obligatory spoiler warning. So if you go to the scene where Grover is talking to the other satyr, if you listen very, very closely, you can hear a small child, specifically a boy's voice, calling for his sister.
God of nature has been hiding all this time. Here, this is like the least natural place in the world. Seems like a strange choice.
And this is confirmed by the director, that the voice that we hear belongs to Nico D'Angelo, who, along with his older sister Bianca, is a child of Hades, and becomes a very prominent character in the very beginning of Book 3, The Titan's Curse, and books beyond that. Unfortunately, though, this still isn't one of my favorite episodes. However, it does get a bit of a higher ranking than the previous 2 episodes, with an overall score of 7 out of 10. Coming in 5th place is episode 2, I Become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom. Now, I know, this episode was really good, but again, it just wasn't there for me as much as the last 4 episodes on this list. I do, however, really enjoy the introduction of some of my favorite characters from the book, such as Chiron, Clarice, Mr. D, Luke, and of course, Annabeth Chase. The whole sequence of Capture the Flag was, in my opinion, perfect. The atmosphere, the energy of the actors, the set itself, everything was just perfect. Poseidon claiming Percy was a little bit different in the book, but I still really enjoyed the way that they did it. So, with a score of 7.5 out of 10 is episode 2. Moving into the top 4 spots, in 4th place we have episode 3. We visit the Garden Gnome Emporium. While I have seen a lot of videos, mainly on TikTok, saying that this was not a good episode, I have to respectfully disagree. I thought this episode was really well done. Now, this show was never going to be a one-to-one perfect adaptation of the book. And of course, changes were bound to happen, as Rick Riordan, the author himself, has stated in multiple interviews. Most obvious is the change of Medusa, as in the book, she's more or less just an obstacle the trio have to get past, while in the show, they make her a little bit more sympathetic, and once again, emphasizing how kind of crappy the gods can be, particularly to their children and each other. I also loved the setup of the trio's faith in each other and trust just being strengthened, with Alecto offering Annabeth to turn over Percy, and then Medusa offering Percy to turn the other 2 to stone, and both of them saying, no, I'm not going to do that. So for the first episode in the top half of season 1, episode 4 gets a score of 8 out of 10. In 3rd place, we have episode 7. We Find Out the Truth. Sort of. A very good second to last episode of this first season. From the trio breaking into the underworld, to almost falling into Tartarus, a little prematurely if you've read certain books, to meeting Hades himself. This episode was an absolute banger, and I loved every second of it. I don't have much else to say about this episode, as I think the ranking speaks for itself, so I'm giving this one an 8.5 out of 10. Just missing out on the top spot is episode 1. I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Like I said at the beginning of this video, what an amazing start to the series. With such a high standard of not only getting the audience's attention, but keeping it, this show knocks it out of the park. From subtle Easter eggs of things yet to come in potential future seasons, to a cameo by Rick Riordan himself, to Walker Scobell as Percy, everything was great. I couldn't have asked for a better first episode and introduction to this world. So just like this last episode, I don't have much to say, so I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. And last, but obviously not least, is episode 8. The Prophecy Comes True. Wow. This episode, from beginning to end, was an absolute stunning roller coaster of emotions. The action, setup, all of it was just a perfect wrap of this season. The fight between Percy and Ares was almost exactly as I thought in my mind when I was reading this for the first time in 6th grade, all those years ago. I know, I'm old. Percy arriving on Olympus to deliver the Master Bolt back to Zeus was just so captivating. I'm so glad that we got a really good looking Olympus, and I'm excited to see more of it in potential future seasons. Seeing Lance Reddick as the Lord of the Skies was amazing. Even though he only had a few minutes of screen time, he was absolutely phenomenal, and I was deeply hurt when I heard of his passing months ago. And seeing the conversation and first meeting of father and son, Poseidon and Percy, was so heartwarming and a little heartbreaking at the same time. I'm not even mad about the slight changes that they made from the book to the show, as in the book, Poseidon more or less kind of tells Percy that he wishes he hadn't really been born, as a hero's life is never easy, versus in the show, he shows a lot of gratitude and genuine compassion for his son. Toby Stephens as Poseidon is another perfect choice of casting. What else can I say? The man just is Poseidon. And of course, we can't talk about this episode without talking about the elephant in the room, Luke's betrayal. Gods, it just hurt. I knew it was coming, but still, it hurt. It broke my heart. The acting in this scene was just incredible. And I love the detail of when Percy finally realizes that Luke was actually the lightning thief. If you look closely, this entire scene, fireworks are going off in the distance. And whenever the camera is pointing to Percy, we see the green light, which is the same color as his eyes in the book and Poseidon's eyes, but it also represents the sea. And then when we finally get to the point of Luke's betrayal, the firework shows red, and it shows the bad half of Luke's face with his scar, emphasizing the fact that he is the evil one here. So clearly the best episode, again, in my opinion, is this one, the season finale. So this one gets a 9.5 out of 10. Once again, these are all just my opinions, so if you have different ones, that is perfectly fine. I just ask that you be respectful in the comment section, but now that we have the rankings done, it's time to move on to my favorite moments / lines from season 1. First up is the entire sequence on Mount Olympus. Seeing it in full and not just being teased with it like what we got at the end of episode 3 was just magical. Like I stated in my ranking segment, Lance Reddick as Zeus was perfect, and it was so heartbreaking to hear of his passing. And it hurts even more to see the positive feedback I'm seeing online about his performance, and it's such a shame that he isn't able to see the final product and see how much the fans really loved his performance. Rest in peace, Lance. You will be missed greatly. Next up is the flashback scene between Sally and Poseidon at the end of episode 7. I absolutely loved this scene, and I don't care that this was never in any of the books. It was such a nice addition to the series. I love the detail that despite these two never look at each other in the eye, they speak with such respect for one another, and it's so heartbreaking that Poseidon is so close to his son for the first time in his life, but is unable to bring himself to speak to him. Just hits even harder. Next up is the fight between Percy and Luke. Do I even need to say anything for this? We all know this broke our hearts, and it's going to hurt even more when they face off again at the end of the next book. After this, I have Percy versus Ares, and again, another scene where I feel like I don't need to say much, as I kind of went in depth during my rankings. The dialogue, tension, and action was just magnificent. And especially with the line of Percy essentially telling Ares that if you mess around, you're gonna find out. For this next moment, I'm technically bringing two moments and combining them into one, as they are kind of two halves of the same coin. And that'll be Annabeth calling Percy Seaweed Brain for the first time, and then Percy calling Annabeth Wise Girl, which are the nicknames that they gave each other in the books. I'm just so excited to see this friendship build and grow even more in future seasons, as at the end of book 5, they finally end up together. Another favorite moment of mine is when Annabeth is chosen to be Percy's first companion. Now, even though it's revealed that he has ulterior motive as to why he chose her, it's still a really nice scene. After this, I have Hermes talking to Luke in the casino. During my rankings of the first 8 episodes, I briefly mentioned how much I like this scene, but I didn't go too in depth, so I'm going to do that a little bit here. Now, despite Hermes not actually showing up until kind of the beginning half of book 2, I really enjoyed this scene, as it mirrors the idea that we're presented with the gods of being absolutely uncaring for their children, whereas Hermes kind of gives a hint that no, they do care about their children, it's just very hard to interact with them. I won't spoil anything too much, but Hermes does come back later on, and he ends up being a very, very important figure in this series. Next up, we have Percy being claimed by his father. While this may be in my top 10, it's kind of close to the bottom, for not feeling, I guess, quite as dramatic as it was in the book, as in the novel, when Percy is claimed by Poseidon, the entire camp kneels before him and Chiron praises him as the son of the sea god. I still very much enjoy it, especially with Annabeth being the one to put 2 and 2 together and realize that Percy is a forbidden child of Poseidon. In 9th place, I have Annabeth's talk with Hephaestus. Now, after Percy bravely sacrifices himself for the quest, by sitting in a chair that traps the user in solid gold, Annabeth works on freeing her friend from the trap after retrieving the shield, but is talked to by Hephaestus himself, where she kind of tells him off, along with critiquing the other gods. Specifically, she calls out Zeus and her mother, and stating that Percy is not like this. While not being in the book, as we don't officially meet Hephaestus until book 4, he's briefly shown in book 3 during a council scene. I really enjoyed this conversation. Last but not least, we have the strength of the trio in the underworld being strengthened. Now, just like my seaweed brain and wise girl, these are a couple moments that I'm lumping into one segment. It was really touching that after Grover loses his pearl, Percy gives him another one so that the 3 of them can escape, even though this means that they won't be able to save Percy's mom from Hades. Percy tells Grover,
Not getting left behind.
And then when Annabeth is trapped while they're walking through the fields of Asphodel, she tells Percy, and it was just such a nice scene.
Percy! This will work. I'll be okay. I trust your dad. You can do this. I know you can.
Now, this segment I want to keep it short, so I'm just going to kind of go over the big name actors of this first season. Again, I want to say I absolutely loved Lance Reddick as Zeus. He did a spectacular job, and we are going to miss him very, very much, especially if you've played the Destiny video games. Second will be Toby Stephens as Poseidon, the father of our main hero, Percy. He, along with a lot of the other members, played their part perfectly. It was almost like taking it straight from the book and putting it on screen. He truly carries himself as such a powerful being, and it's clear where Percy gets his sense of humor from, along with his attitude. Rounding out the big 3 is Jay Duplass, or Duplass. I really don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. As Hades. I absolutely loved his demeanor, even if it is slightly different from his book counterpart, as he was a lot more threatening in the book. His bargaining scene with Percy and Grover was frankly just so well done, and I particularly love his line of,
I'm not in cahoots with Ares. I seldom cahoot. The Bolt is my brother's drama. I don't want any part of it.
After he's accused of working with Ares to undermine Zeus. Next up, I have Adam Koplik as Ares. Like I said before, perfect. He is perfectly intimidating. So many of the details of his character are just, once again, shown as he's described as wearing a leather duster. He arrives on a motorcycle. He's got shades. The one thing I will say, though, is they didn't have the detail of his eyes being filled with flames than actual eyeballs. Next up, I have Leah Jeffries as Annabeth Chase. I do have to say, I really enjoy what she did with her hair in the final scene, episode 8, having the 2 braids. I hope they continue doing stuff with her hair in future seasons. I think that'd be really cool, especially having like blonde highlights. Now, since I'm talking about our main trio, I suppose I should talk about the GOAT. Literally. Aaron Samhadri as Grover was amazing. He was so funny and charismatic, and I just can't wait to see more of him in future seasons. Even though, spoiler warning, we don't see much of him in season 2. Definitely a runner-up for my all-time favorite character in this show is Virginia Cull as Sally Jackson. Now, despite not being in majority of this season, she still manages to steal the spotlight in every shot that she's in. And me personally, I can't wait for season 3, as there are some scenes in there that I am looking forward to very much, and book fans will know exactly what I'm talking about. So supposedly there were some budget issues, as whenever Walker Scobell was on screen, he just absolutely ate. His charm, his jokes, his charisma was just exactly what I imagined from Percy. I've said it a couple times in discussions with my friends and my wife about this show, that Walker isn't acting. He just is Percy. I encourage you guys to go watch some of the behind the scenes stuff of this first season, and you will know exactly what I mean. Now, in this next segment, I want to talk about my hopes for potential future seasons, along with some slight critiques of this first season. So with the chances being very high of us not getting season 2 until at the very, very, very earliest, mid to late 2026, again, if we get the green light from Disney. So I want to express some of my ideas that I have for season 2. First, I really hope they start hitting the nail on the head about this great prophecy. They've already somewhat set up plot points for it in this first season, but if they really want to do this series justice, they need to keep doing so. And speaking of the great prophecy, I hope in this next season that Percy has a couple of dreams about Thalia before, spoiler warning, we see her revived at the very end. And I have to say, I'm curious as to who they'll cast for Thalia. But speaking of Thalia, we have to talk about Zeus, her father. Now, while Lance played Zeus in this first season, the character does show up in later books, specifically books 3 and 5. So the casting is inevitable, and again, it is so unfortunate that he passed before this project was fully completed. However, I do have one idea for who they could potentially recast, and that would be none other than Keith David. Both of them have very similar mannerisms, such as the way they hold themselves when they stand, the way they speak, facial features, and of course, both being very accomplished actors. Next up, I want to talk about the pacing and tension of this first season. I understand that the first book moved rather quickly and didn't leave a whole lot of room to really take in what had just happened, and I definitely get that in the show as well. A few examples of this would be the hunt in episode 4. The trio should be absolutely terrified and running for their lives, but instead they kind of take their time by walking everywhere rather slowly. And my other example is when it's revealed that the solstice has passed, and that again, the trio don't really seem to be in a hurry, which kind of contrasts the entire point of getting it back in time and placing so much importance on this. As in the book, when Chiron is explaining to Percy why it is so imperative that they get the bolt back before the solstice, is that a war between the gods of Olympus would be borderline world-ending, and that Percy would be Zeus's first target if the bolt is not returned on time. So to not only have the solstice passed, but have absolutely no consequences for it doing so is rather disappointing. All this being said though, I do not hate this show. I loved it. I can't wait to rewatch it over and over again until we get season 2. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, like this video as it really helps the YouTube algorithm on my channel. Also, subscribe if you haven't already so you can see more videos just like this one and some of my other gaming videos that I have occasionally on this channel. Let me know in the comment section what your favorite moment or line or your favorite character is in this first season, along with details that I definitely missed when I was recapping this first season. So until the next video, stay safe, demigods.